Alright guys, in this video we're really going to be talking about 19th century Russia. Now look, you have to understand, 19th century Russia is really fun to talk about just for the simple fact that 19th century Russia is a zoo. Alright, nobody knows what's going on, everybody's reacting in a bunch of different ways, and stuff's just getting blown up. Okay, so let's start with 19th century Russia, the place where we started with all these other places. Let's start 1815. Now you remember with 1815, I'm not pulling that date out of the sky. I'm not just saying, hey, 1815, let's start. Remember, that's when Napoleon's defeated, and that starts a new era in European politics. Now, after 1815, okay, Russia is divided up into a couple different groups that have different ways or different theories that would make Russia better, okay? Keep in mind that pretty much all the players in Russia know that they are behind Western Europe, that they are behind the other European powers in progress, in technology, in industrialization, in development, okay? But they can't really agree on what is the best way to proceed, okay? Now, we're going to see that Russia is really ideologically going to be divided between two groups on how to go forward from this point. One group will be the Westernizers. Okay, now let me just kind of hit on the Westernizers real quick. These are the people that believe that the only way to move Russia forward, the only way to get them to advance, is to be more like Western Europe. And remember, culturally, economically, politically, there's a lot of differences between Western Europe, France, England, okay, than Russia, all right? They are very different. So with the Westernizers, they said, look, we need to kind of go in the direction of maybe Peter the Great, or even Catherine to a certain extent, and say we need to be more like Western Europe so we have a spot at the table. The other group are going to be the Slavophiles. Okay, now look, Slav or Slavic is the ethnicity, the dominant ethnicity in Russia. And the Slavophiles, these are people who essentially they were conservatives. They wanted the Tsar to remain in power, they wanted the aristocracy to remain in power, and they wanted to follow the Orthodox Church. So we see there's going to be a clash between these two groups. And really, this is going to dominate the 19th century. You know, do we stay like we are and just keep strengthening who we are, or do we incorporate new ideas? Okay, now you have to understand, in Russia, they don't really politely talk about differing ideas. Okay, they'll have a revolution or they'll blow something up. And keep in mind, by the time we get into the end of the 19th century, it is just going to get more violent, okay? Now, let me talk about, before we talk about the Decembrist Revolution, or the Decembrist Rebellion, let's talk about what's going on in 1815. First things first, in 1815, Russia has the largest army in Europe. Now, keep in mind, having the largest army in Europe, that sounds really good, until you remember that Russia may have the largest army, but a lot of times it's unskilled, okay? With Russia, they go for bulk numbers. Remember, go at the gun. There's always more Borises and Sergeys, okay? So they may have the largest army, but it's mostly untrained, conscripted peasants. So, you know, really it's like playing chess and you're just having a bunch of pawns. Western Europe has some major pieces. They got more bishops and rooks, okay? All right, now, also keep in mind, there's vast areas of Russia. Russia is gigantic, but most of their area is underdeveloped. It's unused. It's a lot of rural lands. There's not big cities. There's not a lot of industrial development like there is in Western Europe, okay? Now, we're going to see, and also to keep in mind that this is Russia, both the Tsar and the aristocracy is reliant on serf labor to produce crops, okay? Now, let's talk about the Decembrist Revolt, okay? We're going to see that a lot of the Westernizers, especially Westernizers that are younger military officers, typically a little bit more urban. They're going to lead the Decembrist revolt. Now, you have to understand what these people want. One, obviously, they're Westernizers. They want to be more like Western Europe. But two, you got to understand like how they want to be like Western Europe. Really, they want some kind of constitution. They want some kind of constitutional government. They want national representation. I'm not saying they want to get rid of the Tsar. Really, they want a constitutional monarchy like we see in other places in Europe. Okay? So they want this. They want this, and they're pushing. But keep in mind, the only way you can get policy pushed is if the Tsar wants it. And at this time, the Tsar does not want it. So you have to wait until he dies. Well, this is where it's going to come about. In 1825, the Tsar dies, and a new Tsar, who is going to be Tsar Nicholas I, he is going to come to power. And those Westernizers in the Decembrist revolt, they see this as an opportunity to influence the new Tsar. Well, the problem is they do it with violence. It gets a little crazy. So what happens is that Tsar Nicholas, he sees the craziness of these liberal ideas, and he's like, well, I don't want any part of that. So instead, the Decembrist revolt fails because Tsar Nicholas is going to trend more in a conservative direction. He fears this kind of westernization. So we're going to see that Tsar Nicholas really, all he does, he's like, I'm going to be super conservative, okay? He is going to create a secret police to make sure that everybody is, on point. Everybody's, not doing anything silly and trying to undermine them, okay? And he's going to become very conservative, okay? And we're going to see he's going to rule like this until the end of his life in 1855, okay? Now, that being said, let's talk about what happens next, okay? Really, through the next 30 years, you have conservative governments in Russia. Look, there are people that want more liberalism, whether it's politically, whether it's economically, but it's going to have to take something externally to show the next czar, you need to change or we're in bad shape. Now, that external event is going to be the war on the Crimea Peninsula, okay? So, from 1853 to 1856, you have the Crimean War, okay? All right, and look, if you know anything about modern Russian politics, you know that this area is still pretty important today, whether you're Ukrainian or Russian, okay? All right, so with the Crimean War, we're going to see that really throughout the 19th century, Russia had been taking areas off the Black Sea from the Ottoman Empire. Remember, in the 19th century, the Ottoman Empire is weak. Arguably, they really can't defend themselves, okay? They're the sick man of Europe. They're not what they are used to be. So Russia takes advantage of this, and Russia starts taking areas north of the Black Sea, okay? Now, really the Ottomans can't do anything about it unless they get friends. Okay, now with the Crimean War, yes, I guess it is a war between Russia and the Ottoman Empire, but it's not really a war between Russia and the Ottoman Empire. We're going to see that England and France will support the Ottomans in this war. And when I say support the Ottomans in this war, I really mean fight the war for the Ottomans. So it's not really a war between the Russians and the Ottomans, although there are a lot of people in the Ottoman Empire fighting. It's really a war between Russia and Western Europe. Now, look, you have to understand. It's like, why would England and France go and support the Ottomans? Really, it's because they feared Russian expansion. Remember, go back to Metternich a couple decades earlier, the idea of balance of power. If Russia gets too big, if Russia takes too much Ottoman territory, it messes up balance of power. And then maybe you can have like a Russian Napoleon or something. Not good. So we see that the English and the French use their naval forces, and when I say naval forces, obviously far superior than what the Russians have, and they put a beat down on the Russians. Now, this is the important thing about the Crimean War, okay? We're going to see that the Russians have to withdraw from European politics for a couple decades because of this. But it shows the Russians how underdeveloped they are in terms of industrialization. And things have to change because they realize, okay, we threw our best punch in the Crimean War and we got annihilated. So things need to change. We need to do something different, or this is just going to keep happening again and again and again and again. So with the Crimean War, we're going to see that there will be a new czar come to power. And that new czar is going to be Alexander II. Okay? The first thing he does is he realizes that by 1861, he's like, this agricultural state of Russia, it's not getting it done. If we tie up all the peasants on the lands through serfdom, there can never be a labor force to work in factories. We'll never become an industrialized state. Okay? So in 1861, you have the Emancipation Edict. And the Emancipation Edict, kind of, there's a lot of caveats here. It's going to free the serfs from serfdom in Russia. Okay? Now, keep in mind, the serfs, when they are freed, they still have to buy land. It's not the best land. And you still have the village that is kind of dominating what these peasants do. So even though these serfs are freed, a lot of times they still have no choice but to still farm locally. Okay? Now, like I said, the edict, although it did increase industrialization a little bit, it didn't have this big explosion of industrialization because the serfs are still restricted to a certain extent, okay? Now, in terms of what they're actually industrializing, the big thing you need to know in the middle of the 19th century that the Russians are doing is that they're building railroads, okay? Their form of industrialization, they go wholeheartedly into railroads, which is important because Russia is vast. Okay, they're going to start building that Trans-Siberian Railway that'll start connecting, the different areas to Russia. Okay, it starts to connect the western part of Russia to the Pacific. Okay, and that's a big deal for Russia because it was never like that before. Okay, also too, we're going to see that by building railroads, you're still spurring two other industries. In order to build railroads, you need coal, you need iron ore. All right, so it's spurring those industries in mining as well, okay? Now, there is one last thing, too. Russia is still going to have a problem with nationalism, not nationalization, that's something different, with nationalism. Keep in mind that although Russia is very big, it's not entirely Russian, okay? Russia has conquered a lot of areas or taken over a lot of areas that are definitely not Russian. And those people don't particularly want to be a part of the Russian Empire. So it's up to Russia to go and put that down. Say, oh, okay, I know you're unhappy where you're at. I don't care. Okay? So, for example, in 1863, we talked about what happened to Poland, and Russia was a major player with this. There was a Polish uprising. Well, Alexander II had to go and put that Polish uprising down. Okay? Now, that being said, throughout the 19th century, politics only become more and more and more violent in Russia. And it's really going to end in 1881 with the assassination of Alexander II, okay, which is going to open up a whole new can of worms. All right, we'll come back in a second. Next part of this video, and we're going to talk about the Ottoman Empire.